Namaste, namaste, and good evening, everyone. So, I think we are now going to the 16th chapter today. So far we have covered 15 chapters, and it is there is this opinion that the Bhagavad-Gita was composed of only 15 chapters initially, and later on 3 more chapters were appended to it. So, in a sense, the whole of Bhagavad-Gita actually was covered in 15 chapters with this essence mentioned and summarized in chapter 15. But then Arjuna had a few more clarifications, and the appendix, 3 chapters appendix were added as an exercise in handling those questions by Krishna. So we are going to now see the detailed answers to some of the questions that Arjuna raised. So 16th chapter is summarized as the Devasura Sampat Vibhaga Yoga. That is, it is a Vibhaga Yoga, which is an yoga through differentiation. Yoga through differentiation meaning it helps our understanding of the subject through differentiation, the analytical differentiation or analysis. So, before we enter into the 16th chapter, Devasura Sampat, I thought that we will spend a few initial, half an hour or so, summarizing and looking through all the previous 15 chapters in a practical sense and practical summary of the previous chapters. So let's go through that initially, and then we will ease into the 16th chapter. So we are talking about controlling our thoughts and refining the balance of useful thoughts that we have by controlling the Physiparis tendencies. So it is reducing the number of thoughts first, refining, and then refining those thoughts so that we have a mindset that can be directed towards the actual goal, redirect towards the actual goal. So reduction, refinement, and redirection is basically what Bhagavad-Gita attempts. 3 things: reducing your negative thoughts, reducing your Physiparis thoughts, and thereby extracting only the useful thoughts or the positive thoughts from your mind, then further refining it such that you make it subtle enough so that it can actually assimilate to the highest level of knowledge and experiences. Then slowly we are able to direct that thought, redirect our mind towards our final goal, the highest goal. So that is basically what Bhagavad Gita is teaching. So if you now look at it, what are we? All of us are existing in a flux of universal energies. As if, if just consider this as an infinite ocean, we are all, various kinds of fish family existing in that ocean. Think about it in that way. Or all of us are, within that ocean of infinitude. That ocean of infinitude has been declared as the self. So far, in the 15 weeks that we have covered this, all of you would have got a gist of that feeling of that self. What is self? Who are you? I am the self, Atman. I am Atman. And that Atman is infinite. In that infinitude, which encompasses everything, I am everything. Therefore, you get the feeling that I am everything. Each one of us thinks like that. I am that infinitude. That is the self. And that self, within that self itself is this universe, and within this universe is each one of us, playing out our roles. And that, therefore, within each one of the physical beings that we all are, there is the spark of life within each one of us, which is the proof of this infinitude existing within us. The universal energies existing within us is providing us with the life. And that, therefore, is the expression of infinitude within us, the life energy as consciousness, conscious awareness, creating awareness within life, the power of life within us, the spark of life within us, creating the state of awareness of the mind and the senses. And because this awareness principle is now energizing our body, every cell in our body, we have the power of perceiving through the senses. We interact, we connect with the outside world, which is actually the outside world is nothing but ourselves, ourself. Everything is ourself. So we are actually perceiving our own self through our senses. We are perceiving, that is the important thing that we need to actually visualize. We, through our conscious awareness, all of us are perceiving the self through the senses. We are perceiving the self through the senses and the mind and the senses. So now the problem comes. Because we are perceiving the self through our mind and the senses, we are run down by the limitations of the mind and the senses. So, what are the limitations? You first of all, mind is something that is very fluid. Mind is a fluid stream of thoughts. Fluid stream of thoughts. It has got infinite capabilities, but at a given amount of time, we are limited by the number of thoughts that we can handle at a time with the physical apparatus. And the senses perceive the outside world and pass on information to the mind. The mind then does a lot of work with it, with its existing experiences and knowledge, and translate the sensory perception into something within our minds to act upon. So, and now what about the senses? Each one of the senses, we have the Panchendriyas, the sense of sight, taste, sound, touch, and smell. The apparatus that helps us to actually enjoy this different forms of objects of the senses are limited. The functions are limited. Each one. The eye, for example, can only handle certain frequencies of light, and it cannot handle beyond certain distances. Similarly, the sound, again, can handle only a certain band of sound audio frequencies and certain distances, at certain distances, within certain distances. So it goes on and off. So the perception that our mind gets of the self, which is infinite, is limited because of the limitations of it. The self actually is capable of knowing everything in this universe, but can see everything in this universe. But our eye is limited, and therefore we only see things at line of sight. Within this range, our eyes are able to perform. So this is basically what happens. The life becomes awareness and perception, and thereby the self gets limited. Now, what happens to these powers within of the life, creating awareness and perception? It becomes our ideas, the power of ideas within our intellect, the power of emotions within our mind, and the physical skills and dexterities of action in the body, through the body. So the ideas, emotions, and skills of the mind, of the intellect, mind, and the body works through thoughts, our motivations, our thinking. In general, our motivations that drive us, because we, each one of us, have our own impetus to perform the motivations. Then we build up our attitudes, aptitudes, the power to, power of dispassion or renunciation, and power of focusing the mind. These are things that we have to develop through several processes of analytics and creating intrinsic and extrinsic motivations, and actually sieving it and then, making it much better. Cooperation, sacrifice, dedication, and acceptance of different four fundamental types of attitudes. Creativity, productivity, profit, and dexterity, the fundamental aptitudes of any human being, human mind. Then, or you can also call it as the dharma of human mind. The eternal dharma of human mind is creativity, productivity, profiteering, and dexterity. Then, the power to differentiate between shreyas and prayas, the good and the pleasant, and ultimately to make our mind identify with what our purpose is, to focus on what our purpose is. Now, so it is all about focusing on your purpose. Now, therefore, Bhagavad-Gita is straight away hitting the nail by asking you to shape and refine your purpose of living. So with that, basically the Karma Yoga, the first 6 chapters focuses on that. So it strikes at the core of your existence. It strikes at the core of the purpose of your life by, first of all, asking you to analyze and then shape your motivations, attitudes, aptitudes, and develop the resilience of your mind through dispassion. Resilience of the mind to stand with the good. And even if you fail, to persist with it. Even if you face difficulties, persist with it and go ahead, and thereby identifying yourself with the purpose with which you are blessed with a life, for which you are blessed with a life. Okay, so you can see this first 6 chapters. First one is the analytical state of your mind, showing your analytical state of mind facing challenges. Arjuna Vishada Yoga. Then comes Sankhya Yoga, which is a summary of your motivations to do work. Then comes Karma Yoga, the selflessness in action through the 4 fundamental attitudes. And then we have Jnana Karma Yoga, which is infusing knowledge into these attitudes by actually developing your fundamental dharma. And then Karma Sannyasa, to make you to do work without likes and dislikes, with a sense of duty and the power of resilience, to build the power of resilience. And ultimately, Dhyana Yoga, which helps you to, it gives you the processes for focusing your mind once you have achieved all this. So that is Karma Pada of Bhagavad-Gita, first 6 chapters. So you can see how life actually gives you ideation, emotions, and skills through the intellect, mind, and the body, and then translates into your thoughts and consequent attitudes, aptitudes, resilience, and focus of mind. Shaping your core. Shaping your core so that you can tap the infinite power of the self through your actions in the right way. So doing the right things is basically what Bhagavad-Gita is teaching us. Do the right things in life. That is Karma Yoga. In one line, you can summarize Karma Yoga as do the right things in life. You should not shirk your responsibility and run away from doing the right things. Okay, so next, chapter 7 to 12 is about unleashing the different kinds of powers that we have. universal, imperishable, and infinite self. Universal, imperishable, and infinite self is right inside you. If you are convinced and you have deep faith in that self and believe that you are universal, you are imperishable, and you are infinite, just imagine the powers that it will unleash from within your minds, helping you to achieve whatever you want in life. So that is basically the next stage. So you first action, and then now refining that action so that it is optimized to its maximum. So we should understand that the power of self is what bestows us the power of discrimination, the power to differentiate between what is good and what is pleasurable, and help us to make sacrifices for the infinite self, devoted to the self, as it were, by which we enjoy the Atma Tripti, joys of the self, in doing whatever you are, in whatever phase of life that you are in whatever professions that you are working in whatever state of life stage you are in. You can actually try to understand what is the right things that you should do and take pleasure in pursuing that right thing and not get astray or distracted by the distracting thoughts and attractions. The self, if you do that, the self will be compassionate towards you. Self, as if by compassion, destroys the darkness of ignorance. It will help you to destroy the darkness of ignorance by the lamp of luminous knowledge. So it is about, we talked about the universal powers existing as the four forces of nature, as consciousness within. So that is the physical Atman, representation of the infinite. Helping the mind in functioning with emotions, rationality, memories, and also ego, ownership, through the various developed capabilities of the intellect, which we all know in modern science as the different kinds of intelligences, which we know ultimately translates into the 7 fundamental cognitive capabilities that each one of us possesses: learning, thinking, reasoning, remembering, problem solving, decision making, and being able to attend focus. That helps us create the world that we live in. Each one of us is translating the universal powers as the self from within, and then helping the mind to cultivate various kinds of capabilities and ultimately expressing as the cognitive capabilities of the mind. And that cognitive capabilities of the mind is getting translated into action plans in this world so that we create the environment in which we live in. So the environment drives us as well as we drive the environment. So it is a circle. And that is how we create the various manifestations of self for each one of us and for the others to interact with. That is what, it was summarized in the 10th chapter, 11th verse, as that the self, as if by compassion, destroys the darkness of ignorance. If we are able to tap these in the right manner to enhance the joys of the self within. So that infinite, therefore, tapping the universal energies becomes that, it was stated as physical, chemical, and biological forces from within us. Again, looking at this process of transformation in various perspectives. The physical, chemical, and biological processes. So consciousness becoming the physical, chemical, and biological forces. working through our intellectual, mental, and physiological functions. Then you see the translation from the infinitude, which is everywhere and which we cannot comprehend, to become consciousness, which we can still not comprehend, but at least we can start experiencing the infinite. We start experiencing the infinite, that is something abstract, as consciousness, which is more experienceable, in the sense that even if we are not able to describe what consciousness is, every one of us is subject to consciousness. And therefore, if you say that I have not experienced consciousness, then it is wrong. Because every one of you, every one of us has experienced consciousness and is experiencing consciousness through various ways and means. So that consciousness, now, if you look at the science behind it, that consciousness is driving the life force within to become the physical, chemical, and the biological forces that help the processes of thinking, intelligence, memory, remembrances, metabolic functions, etc. And making our mind work, thoughts generated, and then creating the motor controls or working through the motor controls to initiate actions in the outside world of moving and sensing, moving about, sensing around, etc. So this infinite self, which is abstract, becomes the consciousness which is experienceable, and which is experienceable by each one of us, because that is the power of experience within us. The consciousness becomes the power of experience within us, which is what is the real experiencer. Your mind is the object of experience of the consciousness, and therefore the mind, and then ideas and emotions are objects of experiences of the mind. Now, ideas and emotions drive our actions, therefore actions are the experienceable physical entities of ideas and emotions. So that is how things work. In fact, we will see in the 18th chapter, which is a long chapter and which is a very descriptive one, where I will go into those details of how the self activates our Atman, or becomes the Atman from within us, and then suddenly how that intellect takes control, and then the mind takes control, and then the senses take control. Control meaning they assume ownership, and then it translates down to the ultimate situation that each one of us face is that who am I? I am this physical body and the mind. That is what every one of us say. And we cannot get out of that rut. That happens. This basically we will see that described in the 18th chapter. So this is the process of translation of the universe, infinite into the universal, and infinite imperishable, and the infinite, the infinite. Okay, so those three stages are described through the three chapters of Jnana Vijnana Yoga, then Akshara Brahma Yoga, and Rajavidya Rajaguhya Yoga, 7, 8, and 9th chapters. And then the Vibhuti Yoga, where we talked about how this self becomes the vibhutis through our thoughts and actions. And the science behind it is basically what I described here, how the conscious power becomes the awareness power, becomes the perceptive power, and within the minds it works as intelligences and ultimately thoughts and actions. So it is actually a very, 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 very clear analytical process of understanding the infinite self as within us. And the Bhagavad-Gita, through 700 verses, have looked at it from different perspectives and actually stitched it together into a wholesome whole, which normally we actually fail to see. We go after various other things and then we get lost. But if we really see this as one fabric, the Bhagavad-Gita, 700 verses, 18 chapters as one fabric. And if it is hung before us and we are able to look at it in one shot, then we will see all this emerging from within. And fortunately, I mean, not fortunately, very interestingly, this knowledge, this wisdom of the eternal principle of life on a canvas can also accommodate science. The modern science that we are trying to unearth and then to understand nature is nothing but a small portion of it. That truth is something that we miss out many a times. And we think that, science does not match with what spirituality talks about, and spirituality is completely free, free of these scientific aspects. It is not. Both are integrated into a mosaic in this canvas. You can see that, actually when you start looking at that from that perspective, from afar, a eagle's eye perspective of what this universe is, we will see the science and spirituality completely dovetailed. And the Bhagavad-Gita is nothing but that eternal wisdom described in a different language for spirituality as well as in science, for science. Yes, the details and specifics of processes and procedures that we unearth in science may not be there in the Bhagavad-Gita, but the root wisdom for that is already there. It is mentioned there, and you can see the descriptions of science that we come up with correlates with all this higher level wisdom that is embedded within the wisdom of Bhagavad Gita. So again, that transformation process is again shown here, the infinite becoming the experiencer within us, and the experiencer giving us the experiences of life. So that is the second stage of bhakti. In fact, this should give you this actual pulsation of knowledge, this pulsation of wisdom should actually give you that exciting feeling of infinitude within you. Because this is basically what is happening. The self pulsing through you, the infinite pulsing through you, self pulsing through you. And that is the second stage. That, therefore, makes your mind subtle. From action to subtlety of mind. That is bhakti. That is the second pada. Bhakti pada. And then we switched over to the jnana pada, where the summary of that was highlighted in the 15th chapter, where we actually put all these things together. Krishna put all these things together as the tree, a wonderful tree of life. The tree of life that is rooted in knowledge, trunked in mindsets and motivations, and branched in attitudes, with the results, the fruits coming as aptitudes on that tree. Therefore, because the knowledge is the root and the wisdom, highest knowledge, wisdom is at the root, and that is which should be driving us, he inverted that tree. And therefore, we had the inverted tree of life. Urdhva moolam atashagam ashvattam prahuravyam chandamsi yasya parnani yastam vedasa vedavidits. That started off like that, depicting this wonderful knowledge as a tree which is inverted. So that is the 15th chapter. And 15th chapter also told us that the infinite self, again summarized it as the infinite self, which is what is driving our consciousness, and which is basically then giving life to our mind and the intellect. Mind and the intellect is enlivened, and that drives our senses and the body. So this is each one of us. Look at the eye, the center of the eye. That is the self. All of us. A continuum of infinite self. The same self. There is only one, because infinites cannot be multiple infinites. It actually kills the very concept of infinite. By infinite, we mean everything. When you say everything, it includes everything. in time, space, and causation. Everything that is in time, everything that is in space, and everything that is in cause-effect relationships. Everything. So there is only one. There can only be one infinite. And that is self. So when we say I, every one of us says I, we are referring to the same self. And the only difference is that that self is now working through different medium. Just like the sun that is reflected from different pots of water. And if we look at the pots of water, we see multiple suns. But they are not multiple suns. That is the same sun that is being reflected. If we are able to convincingly connect with that is basically, in other words, identify with that knowledge, then imagine the kind of world that we live in. Or at least in smaller senses, in the microcosms, think about the families that we have. Think about the family unit. Think about the organizational units. Think about the social units. Think about, communities that we live in. And if we are convinced that the self is infinite and everyone is the same, but working through different minds and intellects, and therefore having idiosyncrasies that are, different, personalities and character, and therefore we accommodate and try to understand these problems, the problems that others face, that others throw at you, etc. And therefore we are now reaching a state where we will be in a much better mindset to coexist and expand. And that is what Sanatana Dharma started off with. Because infinite is meaningless, but infinite's manifestation is coexistence and expansion. So coexistence and expansion became the watchwords of infinitude. And therefore, Upanishads declared, and through Bhagavad-Gita, it was stated in the chapter 3 also. Upanishads declared that Brahman, infinitude, rests in sacrifice. So wherever there is sacrifice, that is the direct manifestation of infinitude. So sacrifice, if you split it up into elements, it is coexistence and expansion. And now again, Bhagavad-Gita expanded coexistence and expansion into attitudes, aptitudes, and fortitude, and all those things. And, we have this multitude of knowledge with which we can practice elements of coexistence and expansion. That is the essence of Sanatana Dharma. Eternal principle of life and living is coexistence and expansion, which is all because there is only the one, the infinite Brahman. So, this self is actually the most luminous light that we all can have. Much, much, much more luminous than our consciousness, the knowledge that we gather through our consciousness. More powerful than the emotions and other compassionate brilliance of the mind, because that is a reflected form of consciousness. The moon, so it is equated to the moon. Consciousness as sun, and the mind as the moon, and the definitely much more powerful than what the senses and the body can perform, the fire. So it is equated as sun, moon, and the fire. Much, much, much more brilliant than the sun, moon, and the fire is this power of infinity, the self. Na tat basayate suryo, na shashankaha, na pavakaha, yad gatva na nivartande, dhama paramam bhava, mama. So if you actually reach the brilliance of the knowledge of the infinitude, then your individual brilliances of the intellect or of the mind and or the senses compares, insignificantly with that brilliant light. That is what this verse summarized in chapter 15. which is actually, this knowledge is Advaita Vedanta, which is about, developing your mind from primitive stages of gazing, observation, analysis to a contemplative existence with the infinite self. That is actually the mission of Advaita Vedanta knowledge, which is basically summarized in chapter 15, again 7 verses 7 and 8 as the self, Mamaivamsho Jiva Loke, Jiva Bhuta Sanadanaha, Mana Shashtani Indriyani, Prakriti Sthani Karshati. That power of the self is basically, is the essence of my portion which is in everyone. All existing beings, whether it is living or non-living, I exist within each one of them. And then with those beings who have a mind, I, along with the mind and the senses, I reside within that body and enjoy the objects of the senses. Shariram yadavapnodi yachapyut kramadisharaha grihitaitvani samyadi vayur gandhani vashayat. And you should understand that when that self is actually residing within or is expressing through the mind, intellect, and the body, that is, it gets out through our mind, intellect, body as actions into the world. What does it do? It takes out the qualities of your personal mind, physical mind. Sattva-rajas tamo gunas, and dealt with sattva-rajas tamo gunas, the quality of the mind, as constructive, aggressive, and destructive. 3 things: sattva, rajas, and tamas. Constructive, aggressive, and destructive. If, depending on the state of your mind, is constructive, destructive, or aggressive, when the self, which is infinite, is residing within it and then existing as ideas and actions in the outside world, I take away that gunas, just like the wind, that when it enters a flower and exits the flower, it takes the fragrance of the flower with it. Exactly that analogy is used. This is how the self is functioning through each one of us. It is the quality of the mind and the intellect that is being spread around by each individual. So this world becomes a conglomeration of these sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic gunas of billions of people working, basically, actually mixing up with these various kinds from different world. And therefore, that is the reason why we face different kinds of situations, different kinds of experiences. And we need to navigate this. We need to navigate these contradictory experiences and the environments created by multitude of minds. We cannot live an existence that is isolated from everyone else, every bodies, every mind. That is basically what we should understand. But what is happening is, as 15th chapter summarized, that we, working through our Panchendriyas and Jnanendriyas, Panchendriyas, organs of perception, and organs of actually sensing, and Jnanendriyas, organs of perception. So organs of sense, sensory input, and the organs of perception, the mind's functions, that is Panchendriyas and Jnanendriyas, working through the mind, the analytical part of the mind, which is constituted of Manasa, Buddhi, Chittam, and Ahangaram. It gets out and we express as individual jivas. What is happening? The self entering this physical body, residing within the physical body, with the mind and manashashtani indriyani, it experiences the outside, the objects of the world, and then dishes out our actions creating the world that we live in. So when the self comes and then gets out, what is happening is it has got all the smells, vasanas of the inside, which is our Panjendriyas, Jnanendriyas, and the Manas and Buddhi. Ahankara. Manas Shashtani Indriyani, that Manas is actually constituted of 4 different parts, which is Manasa, Buddhi, Chitta, Ahankara. Okay, those are details. So it gets out. Bhumira panalo vayu kham mano buddhirevacha ahankaram idiyam me bhinna prakriti. It was declared in the 7th chapter that I am different from all this. The self is different from the functioning of these things. Because the self is the infinitude, which is there in everyone, and which is what is activating it. If we are able to identify, understand this truly, and when you say, who are you, even though in the material transactory world, you will give out your name and other things for the daily living, your mind should still be convinced that I am the self and not this physical being. I am the self. So this is the knowledge of the Bhagavad-Gita, summarized in 15th chapter, as that the self becoming the power that gives intellect and mind its functioning, which is actually filled with the gunas of knowledge, ignorance, and passion, saptarajastamo gunas, and then invigorating your mind with ideas and emotions becomes the power of emotion. So the power of the self as the energy, first becomes the energy within, and that energy becomes the power of ideas and emotions, and then becomes the strength of our physical body through conversion from the body's functionalities into actions in this world. So conceptually, okay, this is what is happening. And psychologically, what is happening is the power of the self becoming in the intellect first. Intellect, the disciplines, devotions, and the power of discrimination. Then becoming the power of faith, dedication, focus, sense control, equanimity, and selflessness. To become, your disciplines of practices, knowledge, your capability to reflect upon knowledge as well as to apply that knowledge in life, so that you become dexterous in the action plane and become more productive, creative, and enriching. So that's a translation process in the psychoanalytical way it is described here, and it is in the physical sense, the transformation is described here. In the psychoanalytical way, this description is the translations that happen within. And it declares that if we are able to channelize, Bhagavad-Gita declares that if we are able to channelize this infinite power through willpower and self-effort in driving our productive capabilities to nourish our experiences, our value systems, and knowledge, and apply it in our life without likes and dislikes, then it becomes a sure recipe for optimizing the capabilities of our BMI, because self is infinite, and therefore theoretically our BMI can function at the infinite level in whatever thing you envisage. You can maximize, you can keep on maximizing, even though you will not reach infinitude is a different thing, but keep changing, keep bettering yourself every day. The purpose of your life ultimately is every day morning, think about beating yourself. What were you yesterday? I will become better today. I will beat my yesterday's status and become better. Day after tomorrow, the other, next day, every day, keep bettering yourself from previous day is basically what Gita is teaching us. Keep doing that in whatever thing that you are engaged in. So remember that the infinite is everywhere and that it is pulsating through us, every one of us. The powers that give our senses the capabilities are there in abstract everywhere. But when it actually enlivens or energizes your particular sense, what is happening is it becomes limited because of the physical apparatus of the eye, ear, skin, tongue, nose, etc. And we work in this manner. This is our picture. This is how we live in this world. This is how we are a living being. Okay, and this was also connected. I tried to connect that with the Upanishad knowledge of how that infinite self becomes the first root of consciousness, the consciousness. Now, if we talk about consciousness in general, again, I'm just repeating some of the things that we have discussed previously, that all of us are aware of things, that means we are conscious. Now, what was the level of consciousness when we were 5-year-old and now, or 10-year-old and now, or even maybe 10 years back and now? Has it not improved? It has improved. It has improved through experiences. It has improved through cultivating knowledge, getting exposed to knowledge. It has improved through reflections, thinking about what you have learned and then trying to apply it in life. So this is a process of expansion. Consciousness expanding from limited being to infinitude is the ultimate. That is what is happening. From birth to death, you are doing that. We are trying to reach, expand, 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 and expand to infinitude. Now, at what level of expansion you have reached at the time of death is dependent on how much you put in effort. So, okay, so that is how the consciousness expands. So, at the moment of birth or at the moment you become an individual, whether it is in the fetus or whether it is outside, but let's not worry about that. Yes, the first time that consciousness blesses you with your identity as an individual, your consciousness is minimal. Very minimal consciousness in terms of physical awareness. But that consciousness is the root, the seed. The seed of consciousness is dropped into the uterus of your mother. And when that starts kicking, you as an individual start existing. And that root of consciousness, which is like a bootstrap cord, with which you can build up anything. So that is the root of knowledge within you, the consciousness, as the knowledge within you. It is the window of knowledge that is provided to every individual, is what Upanishad says. This consciousness is the window of knowledge that is provided to every individual, through which any knowledge can come in and then enter into your BMI and strengthen it. So just imagine that seed. That is called as prajna. And that prajna is the root of everything. That prajna then ties itself up with the physical apparatus that it finds, the BMI and the skin, the flesh, the bones, muscles, everything. And so it becomes initially what the Upanishads talk about is that the first thing that this consciousness, the root prajna, which is completely divorced from anything material, it is pure energy consciousness, that suddenly starts getting connected to the physical things that is growing. It is growing in the sense that actually where is this root of consciousness trapped inside the brain, the neurons, physically. In scientific way, if you look at it, when the neurons start getting connected and then ultimately reaches a particular set of complexity, what happens is prajna sets in. Now, if you ask scientific science, how does this happen? There is no answer at the moment. Still, we are not able to actually theoretically explain that. So that is a research that is still going on. So that at some point it becomes a prajna. Initially, it is the cell of the mother's body itself. And then it starts connecting and then, interacting with the several neurons that are taking shape from birth. No, not birth, actually, from conception, conceiving. It is happening. It is splitting and then multiplying in millions. Actually, every second, millions of neurons are created. It starts. And then at some point, when it reaches a few billion or whatever, we don't know, suddenly there happens a different tapping of energy from the outside, which is physically manifested as some sort of electromagnetic fields and things like that, beta waves, theta waves, and all those things. I mean, let's not go into that. That is that consciousness. So what is consciousness? We don't know still. We have not fully described it. We don't understand it. That is actually the conscious, from the universal energy becoming consciousness within, which is the window of knowledge for that physical entity. And that is same for everyone. It is exactly the same for every individual, not only for us, but even in creatures, even in animals, even in plants. That prajna is the same. Only thing is that prajna developing into higher forms of consciousness is something different because the physical device is different. That's it. So the moment that within us, within each individual human beings, when within this fetus, the consciousness first starts ticking at some complexity of the brain, and then what happens is the brain is still further developing and then getting connected to the various sensory centers, vision center, oral centers, etc., etc., motion, somato kinetic senses, and all those things. It is getting connected, and the moment it starts getting connected to the centers of the brain that are going to be the interface to the outside world, this consciousness starts expanding because it is now getting information from outside world, and then it expands. That is how things are. And then therefore it creates the intellect first, the power to actually differentiate that. The life starts feeling comfortable and uncomfortable, etc., and that is how it starts kicking to find, things like making itself more and more comfortable. The mother starts feeling the movements, etc. All those things happen from within. The intellect is working. Now, identifying this unit as something which is confined within, and therefore it is struggling to keep itself happy and comfortable, and starts going around. That is how that life forms. So, intellect and ego are supposedly, as Upanishad states, the first manifestation of consciousness into physical things. And then comes the mind, higher forms of functioning, and emotions and feelings and doubts and indecisions, etc., of the mind, and also the senses starts functioning. Eye starts developing, bones start developing, eye, ear, and all the nose starts forming, and all those things. And then ultimately, when everything gets formed properly, it comes out as an individual life, and we cut the umbilical cord, and then it is a separate physical entity. So the consciousness, what happened to the consciousness? This consciousness, initially, which is the root of consciousness, which is the window of knowledge, becomes the power of our mind and the intellect. You can say that it is the light of mind and the intellect. So it is called as the Taijasa. The prajna becomes Taijasa, the light of knowledge, etc., physical knowledge, talking about. So it is getting tied and physically, manifesting itself as physical things now. And then when it is actually working through the senses and the body, it actually becomes a consciousness that is truly able to respond to the outside world. The Vishwa, that is called as the Vishwa. Consciousness, that state of consciousness is Vishwa. So the Vishwa is, Upanishad declares it as the waking state consciousness, Taijasa as the dream state consciousness, and the Prajna as the deep sleep state consciousness. 3 states of consciousness. Where did these 3 states of consciousness emerge from? Prajna, Taijasa, and Vishwa. Where did they emerge from? They emerged from the self, infinite. Prajna becoming Taijasa, becoming Vishwa. That is how the 4 levels of consciousness emerged. And that is how we all exist. And we exist in this body of ego powered by intellect and powering the body. The Panchendriyas and the Karmendriyas made up of the Panchabhutas working actually because of the intellect mind of, through Prancha Pranas, the physiological functions, and the Jnanendriyas, the brain mind that is capable of interpreting audio, sensory, visual, etc., all those powers. And we work in this world. And the self is actually everywhere, empowering all these things within us. That is how and then becomes the thoughts in the self, therefore becomes the thoughts in our mind and actions in the outside world. And this is the picture of Bhagavad-Gita, depicted as the chariot, Krishna holding the reins, and Arjuna directing the chariot, the mind directing the chariot, self within. Self is powering it, controlling the senses. Therefore, if the self is in control of the senses, that is the self existing within us as the joys of the self as the supreme motivator that is actually controlling the sensory pursuits. That is what the meaning is. Krishna holding the reins implies your mind, intellect, working through you to always be motivated by the joys of the self only, not selfishness. That is when the mind is fully directed in the right path of action in this world. That is what it is. Arjuna, Krishna, and the five horses of Panchendriyas. This is Bhagavad-Gita picture. This is what Krishna we described in the opening chapter, as well as throughout the essence of the philosophy of Bhagavad-Gita, and summarized in chapter 15. The Gita picture that all of us have in our minds is nothing but our personification, our divine personification. That is it. And therefore, it has been summarized through this slide, a practical this thing which I had posted also, so you can go through that. So therefore, our 15th chapter, consisting of the 20 verses and one-liners, that also I had posted, is talking about the process of selfishness with detachment. The first, 6 verses, and the next, actually 6 verses, the self, we have to cut off selfishness with detachment. We selfishly work in this world because the self is forgotten due to the senses and the mind. That is the next step. Up to 11th verse, it is the summary in 2 lines. Then in reality, it is the self that enlivens all the functions. That is what the next 6 verses talk about, 5 verses talk about. And what is that self? It is the perfect self. It is the universal self. It is the individual self. That is what you are. This is what the 15th chapter, if you look at 15th chapter in 4 lines, it is this: cut off selfishness with the detachment. The self is forgotten due to the senses and the mind. Understand that. But in reality, the self is that enlivens all our functions. Not only that, it is the perfect self within you. It is the universal self. It is the individual working as the individual self. The perfect self is working through us as the individual self. Understand that. The individual that you are is nothing but the perfect infinite Brahman. The wise person knows this, 19th verse. And this is the most secret science, knowing which one becomes perfect. Royal knowledge, Raja Vidya. That is why that 15th chapter is the path to perfection. Now, the Raja Vidya, which chapter it is, 9th chapter, had talked about practically how to utilize it, this power. And in that, we had talked about 9:12 and 9:13, 12th and 13th verses, of vain hopes, of vain actions, of vain knowledge, devoid of discrimination. We become selfish. We are not able to see the self, and are thus possessed of all evil and negative qualities. That is 12th verse. And in the 13th verse, it is described. But difference between those people who are ignorant and those people who are knowledgeable. Mahatmas who possess noble thoughts are able to see the self as the infinite and revere the self as the imperishable. So that is what we should all be. So this was actually subject of chapter. And then Arjuna had the doubt. Arjuna's question arises, or the doubt arises from these two slokas where it was stated about this ignorance and knowledge. So how do we become, that, the first one, and not the Mahatmas? Why? So the answer is basically what is now going to be addressed in 16th chapter. So we are living in false hopes, wasted actions, and useless knowledge, because of which we think wrongly and excessively indulge in the sensory things, that is what excessive indulgence is. Asuric quality. So when you say asuras are excessively indulgent people, physical senses and going after the senses. Now, that is one stage. The second stage is, it is not just about going after the senses, but also actually being criminal, being sinful and demonic, doing bad things. That is when you become a Rakshasa. So the difference between Asuras and Rakshasas are, described in terms of the knowledge and its applied implications. So there are actions that bind us, and there is also the effect of useless knowledge, which I had posted 2-3 days back. So you must have read that. And true knowledge is that which quietens the mind, liberates us from the grief and delusions, and gives fulfillment in life, is what knowledge is, true knowledge is. Actions that free us, actions that make us expand. Coexistence and expansion, actions that make us expand and make us peaceful and pure. That is what is true knowledge. So people who are enmeshed in the selfish knowledge, mogasha, that is living in false hopes, moga karma, engaging in wasteful activity, moga jnana, useless knowledge, and vijetas, wrong thinking, are what are called as asuras and rakshasas. They become asuras and rakshasas, either completely indulgent or becoming also criminal rakshasas. Those people who are at peace with themselves and are always working towards the intent of expansion, they are actually called as devas. So devas, asuras, and rakshasas. This is basically now practically enumerated in the 16th chapter. Devasura Sampath Vibhaga Yoga. So this 16th chapter is a practical summary of the qualities that make us devas or asuras and rakshasas. So I am now going to quickly go through the 16th chapter by listing out those qualities, because they are enumerated in the different verses. And a few slokas are explaining some knowledge about it, which I will expand. But otherwise, I will just list out. It is a simple chapter in terms of that. It is but a practical chapter. The chapter starts off with the first verse defining what the essence of Devas, the Deva Sampat is. So it says that Abhayam Sattva Samshuddhir Jnana Yoga Vyavasthiti. It defines the divine quality in just 3 words initially, top level 3 words. This is basically what we should understand and we should be able to practice in life. So I'm going to actually illustrate some practical aspect of it also. I'm going to define this as, these qualities, these three things combining together to give us what is called as one super quality, which is called as courageous conscience. This courageous conscience, why I have given that, it is not me that I have given this name, but this name, this is a defined quality of selfless people who are excelling in their life, in the outside world. In the modern professional lives and all, they have defined this term as courageous conscience that makes you become a star at workplaces. So that is the reason why I also gave that name, courageous conscience, here to define the Deva Sambat. Abhayam Sattva Samshuddhi Jnana Yoga Vyavasthiti. Abhayam, fearlessness. No bhayam. Abhayam, fearlessness. Sattva Samshuddhi. Your mind, your thoughts should be pure at heart. Sattva Samshuddhi, predominantly sattvic mind. And Jnana Yoga Vyavasthiti. Vyavasthiti, rooted or steadfast in Jnana Yoga, in knowledge, rooted in knowledge. So three things: fearlessness, purity of heart, and steadfastness. Fearlessness, purity of heart, steadfastness in knowledge of self. And then the next line actually describes a few more qualities: almsgiving, self-reliance, and selflessness, study of scriptures. That is actually knowledge acquisition, right knowledge acquisition. Austerity and uprightness are defined first. Okay, so those are our qualities, but we will go to that. Before that, I want to actually describe what this courageous conscience is in the practical sense. So I think all of us who are interacting with the outside world in professional circles and other things should actually get to know what these qualities are and can use this as a litmus test to see whether we are actually possessing these divine qualities. And if we are not, why are we failing? Where are we failing? How we can get out of it? To give you those ideas, I will describe what courageous conscience is, which is rooted in three things. What is it? Fearlessness, purity of heart, steadfastness of knowledge. Okay, let's look at that. Courageous conscience in the modern day world is defined as the ability to judge the right from the wrong. You need knowledge for that. And to judge the right from the wrong and to stick to the right, you need purity of heart. And the fortitude to take affirmative action towards that. That is, purity of heart is required and knowledge is required. And to actually, in this world, in this 21st century world, or we in Bhagavad and all we talk about as Kali Yuga, in this Kali Yuga, okay, we will not use the term Kali Yuga, which will say in the 21st century world, if you want to live in this world, we have to apply this, what judgment of the right and the wrong, and to stick to the right, we have to be fearless also. Without fear, we have to work. Otherwise, why? So that is being described. The ability to judge right from the wrong and the fortitude to take affirmative action towards what one believes is right is what is called as courageous conscience. Okay. So let us now think about what is the roadblock. It is very simple definition. Three qualities which are just said three. If you can actually have these three qualities, we are done. So simple. But then it is difficult for us to practice. Why? That is one. Let us see why it is difficult. Because first thing, of course, is the pressure of authority or pressure of norms. Social, what you call conventions and things like that is basically what is creating problems first. Pressure of authority. In the office when you are working, in whatever position you are in, let's say, or initially itself, especially in government departments and all, you can say that interact with the public. You actually learn Bhagavad-Gita, all the principles as a youngster, let's say, at 25 years of age, you join a government department. The first day you will start experiencing the pressure of authority to do wrong things. That is what happens. So that is what it is. Pressure of authority is the obstacle that we have. First thing that we need to get over with is the pressure of authority. How can you get the pressure of authority? Get rid of, not getting rid of, but surmounting the pressure of authority. How can you get rid of that? I mean, in terms of, surmounting it and standing your value systems. You need to be fearless. You need to be blessed with the purity of heart, not getting actually attracted by the benefits of actually going the other way. And also knowledge, steadfastness. You should know the rules and regulations and protocols and processes of systems, etc., that you are handling very well, so that nobody can fool you. Knowledge is required. You are working in, let's say, in the village office and dealing with administration of parcels and land registrations and things like that. If you are not knowledgeable about the nuances, nitty-gritty of all the rules of the handling of land parcels, etc., and also you are not fearless about actually going through taking the right action in terms of whatever somebody needs, or you are going to be doomed. So you need to have these three qualities. Really begin that knowledge comes in first, and then comes fearlessness and the purity of heart. Your purity, I will not be corrupted by any influences. That purity of mind should be there. So challenging the leader or the norms is one of the challenges that we have to face. We need to cultivate mechanisms whereby we are able to withstand the onslaught of valuelessness. And then not doing what is unethical or morally wrong is the purity that we need to have. I will not do anything unethical. What is morally wrong, I will not engage in that. But suppose you keep silent. Let us say you keep silent. Okay, let them do what they want. I will not do, and I will keep silent. That is moral laziness. Silence about ethics is also another thing that the courageously conscious people will not actually let go. They will fight for those values. So, okay. Now, how to practically do that is something that we need to really think about. For that, there are some factors which we'll discuss at the end of this particular phase. So, how to get around is basically what we need to look at to become courageously conscious, scientific. Getting your courageous conscience in order is basically an important job that from youth, it is very difficult after some stage to actually gather that, unless and until you are totally convinced about these value systems. But getting the youth convinced about these value systems and then making them understand and stick to those things is relatively easy. And that is what I think elders like us, we should be able to actually do. And that's basically what our Pattern Institute is doing through self-analytics, the workshop that I will talk about once we conclude these sessions. So getting your courageous conscience in order is about avoiding moral laziness. You should be independently and critically thinking about value systems and how it is applied. You should not lose conscience in extreme situations and always be watchful of moral laziness. Okay, so there are some terms we should understand that there are 4 types of people. One is those people who confirm, who is a conformist. Okay, this is what is happening. It has been happening in my office throughout. So I will just keep quiet and let those things work out as it is. I don't want to interfere it, or I will conform with it. Okay, everybody takes bribes, so let me also take bribe. That is conformist. What is it? Actually, I know that it is wrong, but I will conform to this pattern. That is intellectual laziness. The next is being passive, lazy in motivation. I will keep quiet. I will not do anything bad, but I will not do anything to prevent this. That is what is called as passive. That is laziness in motivation. Then there is something called as pragmatic. The next is pragmatic. I will not become corrupt. Neither will I just keep quiet. But I will try to exist, in between, maybe sometimes even maybe actually, doing what others wanted, but I will not personally, benefit. That's all. So that is pragmatic. That is just, it is not real conforming with it, but it is a sort of conformance, but not actively engaging in it, which is called as pragmatic, which is called as laziness in action. And then there is the alienated people who are self-centered and will look after only their benefits. Some people who do things to protect themselves. That is called alienate, self-centeredness, self-centered kind of people. So these four types are where do you fall is basically what we should analyze and try to understand. Where do we fall? So if we actually, where do we fall? Understand that. And if you are able to understand that, only then you have to start changing. You have to start changing into a courageously conscience-oriented person. So that courageous conscience all implies, therefore, duty to disobey. My duty is only not only to obey my superiors. That is what the courageously conscience-oriented people understand initially itself. I am not only bound to obey orders. I also have a duty to disobey when it is required and take positive action. It is not about just disobeying and then becoming an alienated person, but doing something proactive and positive such that the energy of the positivity is starting to infiltrate others. That is basically what. Take proactive action. Can you do that? So obey or not to obey and take alternative position is very important. Because you should understand that traditionally, a traditional authority or your boss, etc., can also be faulty. And if you actually go by their faulty decisions, then you are also bound by the crime of disobedience. Obedience, crime of obedience. So now all this is very easy to talk, but then how to practice? So for that, we need to be ready to practice this. How? There are 6 questions to be answered. This is the practical area where you should actually start understanding, analyzing your situation. And then appropriately start taking proactive actions. What is it? But first thing, in the order, there is a priority in these questions. And that the first one is the most important point. The 6th is important, but the least important among these 6. That's it. So that is all. What is that priority? What is at stake for the organization or the family? That is, it depends on whether it is a working person or in the family. Whatever. So that's why I said I've written generally. What is at stake? You have to understand. Okay. For the organization, if you're working in the organization, something is, your boss is acting weirdly, and then there is something that you have to do because you have been ordered to do. And then if you do that, it is wrong. And, morally, you are not ready to do that. You have to analyze. Okay. If I do it or if I don't do it, what is it there for the organization? Think about that. You have to think about the implications of your action or non-action for the organization. And for the organization, for the betterment of the organization. Okay, that is implied. So, and then think, what will happen if you don't do? What will happen? Analyze that. Second, third question that you need to understand is, do you think that your leader in making this order or decision, does he or she have the authority or the expertise or the legitimacy to do that? Think about that. Okay, then depending on that, if your boss does not have the authority to do it, you can very well question it, very easily question it. That The fourth one. Now, what are the costs involved if you do or if you don't do? Human costs, social costs, organizational cost, etc. Okay, that is basically what you have to analyze. And you also personally, you have to start thinking of what is the role that I have been asked to play in this. Am I just a executive of running that order and I don't have anything else to do? Or is it that I have the power to actually take the decision and advise my boss and then, deliberate with him to make changes? What roles are you asked to play? Then finally, if not the least, of course, it is the final thing, but still it is also important, is what is at stake for you personally. What is at stake for you personally is something that you have to consider. Because there are some situations where you will think that if I lose the job by not being, this thing, what should I do? Then that is a pertinent question for you to answer, but that should be the last thing. After answering all the rest of it only, you should actually stick to that selfishness of it, which is for your personal thing. So you have to take the whole thing into, look at it as a holistic thing and analyze these 6 questions and then start working in difficult situations. More and more you will start becoming courageously a scientific person. Okay. So I'm not at the moment not going further into details of working out some specific cases and all, which is part of our self-analytics course. Not this. I just wanted you to have a look at it as a quality of divinity, and therefore 10 steps to take courageous action. What are the 10 steps? I will summarize that, but we can think about it in your practical sense later on. Be proactive. Don't just wait for things. Gather your facts. For that, you need to gather facts. You should understand every aspect of it. Before taking a stand, make sure that if you don't really understand wise counsel, maybe outside the system, build your fortitude. That is, you should actually, yes, sometimes you may fail. Sometimes you may be hard pressed into difficult situations, but you have to still not give up. Fortitude. Work within the system. Make sure that you work within the system, okay, and not break the system. Frame your position so it will be heard. And so you have to actually frame your logical explanation for not doing things as it is ordered. You have to frame your position and so that it is something that will be heard by not only your bosses but others also. Educate others on how your views serves their best interests. You have to actually, that is what proactiveness is. One of the aspects of proactiveness is to grow the teams, your networks, such that they also start looking at things from your perspective and not your perspective, the right perspective. Take collective action and start taking collective actions in terms of, getting support. If you meet leader resistance, seek higher authority and have the financial, and that is again connected to the last question that we had previously, have the financial and emotional cushion to exercise other alternatives. There are situations whereby you may think that working here is going to destroy you. And then the only thing that is left is to get out of that organization. But to get out of that organization, make sure that you have the financial and emotional cushion created previously. So work proactively to create such situations and then make sure that you can jump out. Okay. So that is how, you have to work through the systems. Otherwise, it will be like jumping into the well. So make sure your courageous conscience is shaped properly. So this divinity is to be shaped properly. So that is what the initial the first fundamental 3 qualities, and then the rest of the qualities are going to be now listed in the next few verses. So these qualities are fearlessness, purity, steadfastness in knowledge, charitability, charitable, restrained, wise, austere, upright, harmless, truthful, calm, renounced, serene, non-calumnious, not creating quarrels and other things, compassionate, generous, gentle, modest, subtle, steady, energetic, forgiving, gritty, virtuous, tolerant, and humble or humility. These are the divine qualities, listed qualities. So that is about 25 human qualities which are divine to be cultivated. Devasura Sambha. So, are you a Deva? List out these 25 qualities and see how many of them apply to you. And then you give each one of them some kind of a grading, sum it up, average it, you get a value of Deva. I am 73% Deva, or I am 42% Deva. Something like that you can easily get. Okay, try it out. And then divine qualities lead to limitless expansion. So Krishna says, why do you want to do all this? Krishna says, promises, the promissory note from Krishna is given. What is that? Divine qualities lead to limitless expansion. He guarantees that. So let us try to do that. Whereas demonic qualities lead to limitedness. You do not have to be concerned as you. Now, okay, so what do I do? But Krishna again says, don't worry, because you do not have to be concerned. Why? Because you are born to embrace the divine. Because every one of us is born to embrace the divine, because that sacrifice is right within us. Brahman. Infinity is within us. I am infinitude. I am Brahman. I am coexistence and expansion. Therefore, I am compassion, truthfulness, peacefulness, etc. So you, the seed, the prajna is me. It is within you. So you are bound to succeed. The only thing required is what? Self-effort. Put in your effort to open the knowledge of wisdom. That is all Krishna says. So with Krishna as the guide, Arjuna is bound to embrace the divine. The mind is bound to embrace the divine. With the self as the guide, the mind will succeed. Don't worry. But we have to really apply the mind in tune with the self. That is all. There is only one thing to do. Your mind should be tuned to the self, the frequency of the self. Then the music of self will flow out. The radio, the frequency, the self station, tune it to self, and the music of the self will come out. Swam Geetam will come out of you if you are able to tune your mind to the self. That is what Krishna says. Okay, so with that promise, then Krishna dives into the other aspect, the negativities. He talks about greed and anger and lust, selfishness. Greed, anger, and selfishness as the three gateways to hell. This is what creates all the problems, despite knowing all the previous things. And therefore, I start looking at me as the physical BMI. And therefore, hypocrisy, arrogance, pride, conceit, anger, harshness, ignorance, impurities, bad conduct, untruthfulness, short-term goals, indiscipline, unstructured value systems in life, no value systems at all, driven by selfish desires, hypocrisy, arrogance, intoxication of pride, delusion, and impure results. So, negative qualities, the demonic and the Rakshasa qualities, the Asura and Rakshasa qualities emerge because of greed, anger, greed leading to anger, greed coming from selfishness. That is the problem. And become conceited, stubborn, arrogant, pretentious, ostentatious, egoistic, power-hungry, arrogant, lustful, and angry. So, the Asuric qualities are listed. I'm just listing it out, not just simply from anywhere, but from the slogas, as it is. So, nothing has been added, nothing has been deleted from what the slogas give. All these are listed in the Bhagavad-Gita. This is how you are a Rakshasa or a Asura. That's it. So here also you can give values and then find out how much of Rakshasa is there inside you. How much of Asuric nature is inside you. So now you know why the chapter is called as Devasura Sambhatta Vibhaga Yoga. You understand what is Daivigam, and what is Asurigam. And then half the job is done. Now next is to apply it. That's it. So overcoming lust, greed, and anger is basically what is now described. So let us look at it now at this point. Again, look at it from the whole Bhagavad-Gita point of view. So look at it. The challenge. There is this challenge. We are faced with the challenge. Small challenges in the daily world or large challenges in the whole life, etc., or in the organization, whatever. Everyday challenges, monthly challenges, yearly challenges, or life challenges. This challenge needs to be faced through work. Strategies for work, motivations, sense of duty, attitudes, aptitudes, fortitudes, and focus of mind. So first six chapters to face the challenges. Now, to face the challenges, you also need the second stage, which is devotion, which is about self-belief, believing that you are universal, imperishable, and infinite, first, and developing multiple perspectives, the vibhudis, and ultimately to get inspired. Vishwarupa Darshanam and vibhudis, and then to be inspired in what? With yourself, love of the self, inspired by the self, and work only for that. That is devotion, self, powering this, when you have this. So that lust, greed, and anger are controlled, refined. Actually, it is not controlled. It is actually refining lust, greed, and anger. That is what, the beautiful thing that in this chapter Krishna says is that lust, greed, and anger, don't give it up. Have lust, greed, and anger. Only thing is that is where, refinement happens, bhakti happens. The lust has to be for the self, the joys of the self. The greed has to be for that happiness. And anger should be if you deviate from the path of actually going towards the self. The moment you do something selfish, be angry with yourself. When you enjoy the joys of the self, be greedy. I want more. And therefore be lustful towards the self. Highest form of what you call, desire for the self. Highest form of desire for the self, the lust. Towards what? Towards self. So refining your lust, greed, and anger towards the self becomes a devotion that makes you become self-reliant, self-believing, and powered by the self, developing multiple perspectives and inspiration in life. That is the 7th to 12th chapters talking to us. Now, how can you actually do that? You can only do that through knowledge of understanding what the self is and what is the self of your goal. We discussed that previously when we discussed 8th chapter and 13th chapter, etc. Then we need to understand what is actually inside you, which the self is taking out. Vayur gandhan nivashayat, that the smell, the vasanas inside you. So you have to understand the vasanas in detail. But that is what we did in chapter 14. And we are further seeing that as Devasura Sambat. And now you should also develop dispassion and discrimination. That is what 15th chapter talked about. Asanga shastrena dridhena chitva. We have to cut away from all these disparaging thoughts, Fissiparous tendencies, and stick to what is the good path. That is the way you face the challenge to become a star in your life and living. So this is basically what the whole Bhagavad-Gita is teaching us. So let us look at it a little bit, detail by each one of them. So that it is about reducing your lust, greed, and anger through Karma Yoga, refining your lust, greed, and anger towards the self, and ultimately redirecting your thoughts, your lust, greed, and anger towards only the self by understanding what the not self is. That's it. That is as simple as that. This is what Devasura Sampath Vibhaga Yoga teaches us. So let us look at it, this also. So that is about deflating your lust, greed, and anger. That is what it is. Deflating it. Filled with ego. That look at it as a balloon which is filled with air. Balloon which is filled with ego. To take the ego away, deflate the balloon. That is basically what it talking about. So here it is that, joys of the self as the motivations, selflessness as empowering the sense of duty, productivity, attitudes geared towards productivity, aptitude geared towards creativity and innovation, fortitude geared towards a resilient mindset, and focus geared to perfection. Or Karma Yoga. And then the Bhakti Yoga of infinitude, developing faith in the self, and therefore a quality of living in the self. Quality of your thoughts, quality of your actions are refined. And then ultimately the knowledge to bring in utility to what you are doing. You keep on doing things which are of no value to others and the benefits of society, no sense. So you have to have utility. Bring in utility. Bring in optimization in what you are doing, controlling sattvic, rajasic, and tamas, and optimizing the sattva, optimizing it. So that your thoughts are, and actions are precise and accurate, reaching towards the goal. So utility, optimization, precision, and accuracy. This is basically the reflections in life and living that the Gita intelligence teaches us. This is the music of the self, Swam Gita. So practically the music of the self is about these things. Here, listed out. So the whole Bhagavad-Gita translates into these things in the practical side of life and living. So Karma Yoga helps you to reduce your lust, anger, and greed. Summing up, Bhakti Yoga is passion for self, refines your lust, anger, and greed. Jnana Yoga redirects your passion towards the self. Ultimately, you doing all these three things, all these three, karma, bhakti, and jnana together, always getting into that is what is called as Dhyana Yoga, or constantly keeping watch and doing these three things is called as Dhyana Yoga. That is why Dhyana Yoga is not a separate yoga in Upanishads and in Bhagavad-Gita. Dhyana Yoga is the thing, ultimately, the three things combined is called as Dhyana Yoga. So, what is required is knowledge rooted in self. And, this knowledge of the Brahman, becoming the universal forces, becoming the powers of Viveka, Maya, Viksheba, Jnana, Karma Yoga, Purusharthas, etc., into our working through our brain functions as knowledge or lack of knowledge, thoughts driving your ignorance or knowledge driving your thoughts, and thoughts driving your actions. The cause is knowledge, the impetus are your thinking, and the world, it becomes your result of your actions. So basically it is the Karana, Sharira, Sukshma, Sharira, and the Stula Sharira of your existence. Okay, not going to the details, that is Vedanta, which at the moment we don't worry about that. Just connected that only people who are aware of it can connect that, that's all. So this constantly being fueled by this thought is what is called as Ananya Chinta. Ananya Chinta, Chintana, always focused on the self. And that is basically what 9th chapter, 22nd verse, the central piece of Bhagavad-Gita says, Ananyas chintayando mam ye janaha patyupasate tesham nityabhiyuktanam yogakshemam vahami aham. Total dedication and focus to the self will help in developing new capabilities and in enhancing your existing capabilities. So that is the central message. Those who work without distractions and are always devoted and focused on the goal, for them the process in the brains, the source is the brain, will take care of you to secure what you lack, yoga, and what you already possess, kshema. Enhance what you already possess, shema. BMI just becomes then a tool in the hands of the self. So with that, I think we will close the discussion on chapter 16. And then next is going to be the 17th chapter, further refinement of faith. And then 18th, the next 2 to 3 classes, we'll talk about that. So before I conclude, let us look at let us chant the mantra, and then we'll discuss.
पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते।